Welcome back to the Rant and Review Pro Wrestling. This is a commentary, and we're going to be talking about something very interesting that's going on as the fallout from AEW Full Gear kind of takes shape on the internet, and with a lot of wrestling fans off the internet, fans in Japan, fans in the West, and it's surrounding the Will Ospreay signing to AEW while he's still under contract for 2.5 months to New Japan. And there's a lot to unpack with this. We're going to talk about the implications of it and kind of how Tony Khan isn't too dissimilar from Vince McMahon as much as we kind of thought he was. But before we get into that, and there's going to be good and bad on this. It's not going to be a hit piece against AEW, and this is not going to be it's not going to be one of those. I'm going to present both sides, both ways to look at this. Especially for New Japan fans in the West, because we're feeling a little shorted right now. But before we get into that, I want to remind you that there are a lot of goodies down below. In fact, one of them is a video from the old days. Will Ospreay, the International Pro Wrestler. It's a very good documentary that's on Amazon. There's a link down in the description box below. I think it's still available for 99 cents. It might be a little bit less or more depending on when you're watching this video, but check that out down in the description box below. We also have some free stocks and free crypto from places like Coinbase and Webull and Robinhood. So if you're interested in your financial future, go check that out. But let me get into this, and I'm going to talk about this in kind of just a real personal off the cuff kind of a way. In pro wrestling is a fictional event. We all know it's fiction. And much like other TV shows and movie series, there are times where characters are killed off on shows. In wrestling, the equivalent to that in wrestling is when a wrestler leaves a company to go elsewhere. Because essentially that character is, that is in wrestling terms, a character being written off or killed off of a show. I go back to, as some of you may know, I became a big Walking Dead fan way after the show stopped being popular, but I watched and caught up with a bunch of the first 8 seasons. And then the first season I got to watch in real time as the episodes came out was season 9. And right before season 9 hits, and those of you who are Walking Dead fans know where I'm going with this, it was announced that Lauren Cohen, who played Maggie, who was a major character on the show, was leaving in season 9. And Rick Grimes, played by Andrew Lincoln, was leaving in the season 9 5th episode. So I looked at it and went, what? And there was a bunch of conjecture about what was going to happen. How were they going to write Rick off the show? Were they going to kill him off? Would they leave it open for him to come back and all this other kind of stuff? And we kind of have the same thing right now going on in this partnership between AEW and New Japan that tends to be a lot more one-sided than we all kind of hoped it would be, especially us New Japan fans in the West. And it's an interesting kind of parallel I'm drawing here, because much like on a TV show, when a character is written off the show, in a wrestling promotion, when you're writing a wrestler because they're leaving to go to another promotion, there's kind of this whole process that's there where, okay, if the wrestler's a champion, he's going to drop the title. If the wrestler is in charge of a faction, he's got to kind of pass the faction on to somebody else. We saw this no matter what reason the wrestler is leaving the show. You can go back to Shawn Michaels when he got injured and he passed the torch of Degeneration X, got passed to Triple H, and Triple H took over DX. The issue that a lot of fans have, especially New Japan fans in the West had, and apparently in the East, because I've seen a lot of Japanese fans express the same thing, is that we all kind of assumed, since Ospreay's been talking about it, that, yeah, Ospreay's not going to be here after. This is his last contract with New Japan, likely. And we all know those contracts. And at the end of January, we saw it with AJ and Shinsuke, when it was the first time that was a big deal. But it also happened with Devitt. Happened with the Bucks and Omega and Hangman. Happened with Jay White last year. And we were expecting kind of to say, okay, Ospreay's likely going to sign with AEW, so he'll still kind of be around, but we expect him to finish out his stories in New Japan, and he really kind of hasn't. I know some people think he's got nothing else to do right there now. I was like, no, he's still got things to do, because number one, Ospreay is their second highest ranked champion. He is the UK US champion, and in addition to that, they're making a new championship per his promo that he dropped to bring back a version of the Intercontinental Championship. Now, that's still kind of murky as how that's going to work out, but that set up the big Wrestle Kingdom match between Ospreay, Moxley, and David Finlay, who is the current leader of Bullet Club over in Japan. In addition to that, Will Ospreay is the leader of the United Empire, which is one of the biggest factions in New Japan right now, a faction that New Japan made for Ospreay. He's still the leader. So what happens with the United Empire? Who's going to lead the United Empire in New Japan? Are they just going to disband it the way, because last year earlier in the year, Minoru Suzuki, he disbanded Suzuki-gun. And for those of you who are not really familiar with New Japan, getting a faction, first off, being made a leader of a faction is kind of a big deal. And especially if they make a faction for you, only a handful of people have they done that for in recent times. Like Kojima, it was Kojima-gun, and then it became Suzuki-gun for Minoru Suzuki. Tetsuya Naito, they made Los Ingobernables for Naito. They made Chaos for Shinsuke Nakamura, who then passed it to Kazuchika Okada. Obviously, Fergal Devitt, a.k.a. Finn Balor, they made Bullet Club for him. So getting a faction made for Will Ospreay had the United Empire made for him as his faction. That's a pretty big deal. That's pretty high praise from the company, and a lot of confidence and responsibility, as Ospreay likes to talk about a lot lately, that's given to you. And as of right now, New Japan fans don't know what's going to happen with the United Empire. Ospreay's leaving. So what happens to, there's about 5 or 6 guys in New Japan. There's Jeff Cobb, the Great Okan, Hinare, and Catch 22 in particular. And they've got a couple other members there as well. One new member, in fact. And it's kind of a question, if they're a faction, is somebody leading them? Or are they just or are they going to break that faction up and those guys are going to go to separate ways? We don't know. They haven't even started on that storyline at all. I hope by New Beginning that would be the storyline, that either Ospreay is going to pass the torch to Jeff Cobb or the Great Okan. Those are the 2 likely candidates. But again, right now, nobody knows what's happening with that. And of course, the championship, nobody knows what's happening with that. A lot of us would think that Ospreay, since he's leaving, he's now officially announced that he's leaving the company, that, now this match at Wrestle Kingdom with Finlay and Mox, obviously Finlay's got to win the match. They're creating a new secondary championship to replace the old Intercontinental Championship that the fans have wanted them to bring back ever since they got rid of it. Ospreay's wanted them to get it back. Ospreay's suggestion was to change this US-UK title into a version of the old Intercontinental Championship. So that new title is going to be made at Wrestle Kingdom. And why would you put a new title that you want to establish as this major secondary championship? Like the old IWGP IC title had a lot of cachet to it. That title was worth a lot. Shinsuke Nakamura had a lot to do with that. If you're going to create a new version of the championship, why would you put it on somebody who's not going to be full-time with the company? So it kind of lends itself to David Finlay. That's a whole other can of worms, because David Finlay has not quite caught on with a lot of fans, both in Japan and the US, as being the leader of Bullet Club or even as a upper tier wrestler yet. They've done a lot, and it's not, that's a whole other story. I kind of feel bad for David Finlay, because here's yet another thing kind of piled on top of him. And he's kind of struggled a bit with getting this rebel character over. And now he's got this weight on him that he's got to carry this new secondary championship. He's going to need a crazy performance at Wrestle Kingdom to change his perception around. But that's, again, a story for another time. But as a Western New Japan and AEW fan, and a fan of both companies, a lot of us have seen this whole thing since it started in New Japan that wound up what became AEW. A lot of us have wanted to see this collaboration. We were happy when the collaboration started, ever since Kenta showed up on that Dynamite a couple years ago during the pandemic. It was like, oh my God, they're finally going to be partners. Great, this is what we wanted. But as I said earlier, this partnership seems a bit lopsided. AEW basically has signed away, almost with the exception of, I would say, Zack Sabre Jr. and Tama Tonga. AEW has basically taken all of those foreign wrestlers and even the announcer, Kevin Kelly, who are all synonymous with that hot period of time back in the 2010s in New Japan. They basically gotten almost all of them now. They got Hangman, they got the Bucks, they got Kenny, they got Juice Robinson, they got Jay White, they got Will Ospreay, they even got new guys like Aussie Open. We're going to talk about that in a second. But they've all signed with AEW. Very few of them have done anything back in New Japan. And now let's look at so what's the New Japan side of it? So New Japan, Jay White, Will Ospreay, Kenny Omega, Kota Ibushi, Trent Beretta, so on and so forth. They've all gone over to AEW. Okay, well, what do we get in exchange in a partnership? Well, They've gotten Wheeler Yuta, who was in the Best of the Super Juniors a couple years ago. Lance Archer, who's barely in AEW. He was in the G1 last year. Eddie Kingston was in the G1 this year. Mox is the only one who really kind of comes around with any frequency. He was just in New Japan a couple weeks ago for a show, and he's booked for Wrestle Kingdom. Mox is really the only one that's frequently over there. Kenny Omega, obviously, he came back for 1 week earlier this year with that match against Ospreay at Wrestle Kingdom. Claudio made one match that he barely made because he got there literally late as hell and barely made the show. He literally got off the plane and had to take a taxi and just in time for his match at the New Japan show. And outside of Juice Robinson showing up over in the States for, some NJPW strong shows, Willow Nightingale, they made her the strong women's champion. It's really basically Eddie Kingston and Jon Moxley, let's be honest about it. Oh, yeah, and FTR, of course. FTR did a couple shows over there as well. So I would say it's a bit lopsided, but it's not too dissimilar from what happened before, and I'll get to that into the positive spin on this whole thing. But as far as the negative spin, it just dawned on me while I was watching the press conference that it was kind of, I don't know, there's something that didn't sit right with me as a New Japan fan watching this press conference with Tony Khan wearing an Antonio Inoki scarf, with Will Ospreay, who is still on a contract with New Japan and basically has just said, well, everything else I do there for the next 2 months doesn't matter, because now you can't even suspend your disbelief about it mattering, even though we all kind of thought he was leaving. Well, now he's leaving for sure, and well, nothing matters now. It's like nothing he does over there is going to matter for the next couple of months, depending on how they write him off the show. Again, the character is leaving. And at the same time that they're doing their own version of the G1, there was something about it that just kind of said to me, this is kind of the same thing Vince did, just a very polite way of doing it. One of the things I never liked about, and one of the problems I had with WWE and the way Vince did business, is the fact that they would raid the talent from all these other places. And not only the talent, and not only the wrestlers and the broadcasters, but take their ideas. This is not very dissimilar from what WWF did with the AWA when they took Bobby the Brain Heenan and Jesse Ventura and Gene Okerlund and Hulk Hogan, Ricky Steamboat and Roddy Piper and Greg the Hammer Valentine from the NWA, and he took some of their broadcasters and brought them over to WWF. In 88, 89, when Crockett kind of shut down and it switched over to Ted Turner, Ronnie Garvin and Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard and Barry Windham and Terry Taylor and the Road Warriors all went over to the WWF. And they even took Old Concept. Starrcade was the original big annual wrestling event in 1983. WrestleMania came in 1985. And WrestleMania was Vince taking the idea of Starrcade and making it the Vince way and doing it a better job of it, admittedly. Well, they've got their summer show, the Great American Bash. We'll have SummerSlam. Well, they have their Thanksgiving show, Starrcade. Well, we'll put on a Thanksgiving show, Survivor Series. The Hell in a Cell was an old match. The Tommy Wildfire match, that was an old match that was done before. They took, obviously, War Games. They incorporated War Games after they bought. So there's a long history of WWE taking from other companies and then putting their spin on it and which they're very good at, and promoting it. That is the long history of WWE. And when Vince did it, it was in a much more aggressive, kind of hostile takeover kind of way. Tony Khan has done pretty much the same thing to New Japan. We all kind of thought the war was between AEW and WWE, but it's kind of a soft takeover of AEW and New Japan, because as I illustrated before, pretty much almost everybody from that hot era in the 2010s in New Japan has now been signed by AEW. Tony Khan has brought them over. Tony Khan is doing his own G1. Tony Khan is taking Kevin Kelly. Tony Khan's wearing an Antonio Inoki scarf. You got Will Ospreay, who just announced that he's going to have a major match at New Japan's annual stadium event, but now that's all diminished. Forget about that, because we've signed Will Ospreay. By the way, the reason that they announced Will Ospreay when they did is because the tickets for All In and Wembley are about to go on sale, and they wanted to use, hey, Will Ospreay's going to be there, the biggest European wrestling star outside of Drew McIntyre. is going to be at this Wembley show, and that's the reason why they announced it when they did, even though Ospreay's contract expires in 2.5 months. But that just tells me, as a fan of both AEW and New Japan, that New Japan's annual stadium show is less important than AEW's annual stadium show. You see what I'm saying? So that is kind of the downside of it. And I think this is one of those things where people in the business, and I know Ospreay and Tony Khan and Obari and all the people working over there, they have their way of thinking about it, and they think this is fine. And a lot of people who are wrestling journalists or want to be in the business think this is fine, but and AEW fans are fine with it, and WWE fans don't really give a shit. But New Japan fans, we always get the short end of the stick. And I'm not really buying this whole thing. Well, you know, he's going to finish his commitments, but he can always go back to he can always do shows in New Japan. Really? Aussie Open, have they gone back and done any shows in Japan? Has Jay White continued anything with the Bullet Club stuff, even though he's got Bullet Club Gold in AEW? Have they even sniffed at anything about that over him going back to Japan and doing something, which I thought might have been something coming up for Wrestle Kingdom this year? Juice Robinson, has he gone back? Trent Beretta, has Trent Beretta gone back and done anything? Trent Beretta ain't doing jack in AEW. Has he gone back and done anything? No, he hasn't. So I'm not, just because of the given track record, I'm not all that confident that Ospreay is going to be on more than one show in the next year after he leaves New Japan. If he's going to be back there to do anything of any significance, I'm not really confident about that, just given the track record. This is not a new issue for New Japan. It's been going on for a very long time. We can go all the way back to Brock Lesnar being the IWGP champion and deciding he wasn't coming back and wasn't returning the belt. And let's just look at recent, we don't have to go back that far. Just look at recent history. Look at the last couple of years. They gave Jonah this giant win in the G1 over Kazuchika Okada, made him the leader of TMDK, and then a couple months later, after all of I've always wanted to come to Japan and I always wanted to do this, a couple months later, he goes F's off back to WWE and leaves them hanging high and dry. Do we need to even talk about Carl Anderson and Doc Gallows? Twice. Carl Anderson, they put the Never Openweight Championship on Carl. Remember that last year? They put the Never Openweight title on Carl Anderson, and him and Gallows signed with WWE, and he just decided he was going to no-show a show that they had already booked him for to defend the title against Hikuleo, but WWE had the Saudi show. So Carl Anderson said, F off. I'm not doing a New Japan show. I'm going to, even though I'm the Never Openweight champion, I'm not doing a show. I'm going to do the Saudi show because it's more money. And then we get to this year, which is where the AEW thing comes in. And these are the three things that all of them I kind of was like, First, it was Aussie Open, who New Japan put both of the tag titles, the New Japan Strong Tag titles and the IWGP Tag Team Championships simultaneously on Aussie Open. A couple weeks later, Mark Davis is injured and they drop the belts. And then, a couple of weeks after that, then there's Mark Davis and Kyle Fletcher on AEW, and they're announced as being All Elite. And they haven't been back to Japan since. That one kind of struck me as a little shady. Then we had the whole thing with Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly, of course, and by the way, I don't blame any of these guys for doing what they're doing. I'm just explaining what the scenario actually has been. Outside of the fact that I do think the Aussie Open thing was kind of shady, and I'm not the only person who thought that. Alex Coughlin talked about this in the G1 press conference.
Fast forward to now. This is the biggest G1 ever, huh? G1 33, 32 people. Big pool. A couple months ago, I was told I'm not in the G1. Not enough room for you. I got to sit home even longer. Until what happened? A couple of Aussies that shall remain nameless made the office look like a bunch of fucking chumps. Well, they were too busy figuring out why the square block won't fit in the circle hole. They left to get the bag in an American company. And I finally get the call about 6 weeks ago. Congratulations. You're finally in the G1.
But yes, then after that, Kevin Kelly, who's been doing a very long, and God bless Kevin Kelly, for years he's been traveling back and forth to Japan. He's been the English voice of New Japan Pro Wrestling for a number of years. He finally, and understandable for his family, it's a lot of travel. He finally stepped down. We knew eventually that was going to happen, but he was supposed to do Wrestle Kingdom, and now we find out that, oh wait, no, he can't do Wrestle Kingdom. So we actually don't get that goodbye to Kevin Kelly at Wrestle Kingdom that we thought we were going to get, which would have been cool, but it's not going to happen. And that was a little, again, that one I can't really blame anybody for, but I'm also kind of going, like, nobody's really making it. There's no effort being made in that would benefit New Japan, if you see what I'm saying, from these situations. And now the third one with the Ospreay situation, which again diminishes Wrestle Kingdom, which is New Japan's big annual stadium show, in favor of AEW's big annual stadium show. So in that respects, I can say, yeah, it seems a little weird. This partnership with AEW and New Japan seems a little bit one-sided. I can't blame Tony Khan or Will Ospreay or Aussie Open or Carl Anderson or Jonah or Jay White or so on and so on and so forth for doing what they're doing. If they can get paid more money, they can get paid more money. But part of me kind of wonders if New Japan did have better finances, or if the exchange rate was better like it was in the 90s when everybody wanted to go to Japan, because the way the exchange rate was then, you got a lot of money. You got a crap ton of money from going to Japan and wrestling, probably more than you were gotten in the States. And ultimately, it really does come down to a money thing, because I can guarantee you, the exchange rate isn't the same it was in the 80s and 90s, where, a lot of American wrestlers wanted to go to Japan because of the exchange rate. You got a lot of money. I have to wonder whether or not, if New Japan could give more money, could offer more money for these guys to be there, if some of these guys that have left wouldn't still be there. I mean, this is all driven by money. Really, at the end of the day, I mean, that's the big driver for Ospreay right now. No, and again, in this case, no, I can't say anything bad about that. Do what's best for your family as a professional wrestler. It really kind of comes down to, and I see with a lot of the New Japan fans, they're not really mad at Tony Khan. They're not mad at Ospreay. They're kind of just disappointed in New Japan. They're disappointed in New Japan that New Japan didn't seize the opportunity that it had 5 or 6 years ago to kind of increase and expand and be able to offer contracts to keep some of this talent and not just kind of be this stepping stone towards the big billion-dollar companies, or multi-million-dollar companies, I should say, over in the United States. So that's kind of the negative taste that was left in my mouth from this whole thing, and just really the last couple of days, the last 24 hours in particular, and just as all the news came out about this, and then we got more details about how it was that Ospreay could sign a contract with AEW when he's still under contract with New Japan, and it's kind of effing off the last 2 months of New Japan, because again, at this point, it doesn't mean anything. But like Rick Grimes, even though we knew Rick Grimes was leaving The Walking Dead at the beginning of season 9, if they can write out Will Ospreay in a satisfying way, and that leaves the door open to the future, I think a lot of us would be okay with that. It just really kind of came out of nowhere, and at the end of the day, yeah, it makes New Japan's events, it makes New Japan's championships, and it makes New Japan's contracts look like they're worth about as much as toilet paper right now. But here's the positive side of it, and here's the positive spin I'm going to take about it, and there are a couple positive things that I can take away from this. The number one thing, though, is that if New Japan is not going to step up its game, then AEW should. Maybe Tony Khan should be wearing Antoni Inoki's scarf if New Japan's not going to step up their game. Maybe they should be doing the Continental Classic if New Japan's not going to step up its game. Maybe they should be taking all of the foreign talent, and that's where the way station should be if New Japan's not going to step up their game. And a lot of people have been asking New Japan to step up their game. It's been very hard on them with the pandemic, so it's understandable why they haven't. They're kind of behind the 8 ball. But like I said, there are some bright spots here. Now that the majority of that mid-2010s crew is now all kind of moved over, again, with the exception of Tama Tonga and Zack Sabre Jr., have all moved over to AEW, we have this whole new crop of talent. Names that you're going to be familiar with, and people are going to be asking when are they going to AEW in probably the next 2 years. And I'm talking about Ren Narita, Yota Tsuji, Uemura, Shota Umino, and some of those guys have already stepped up in a big way. The War Dogs, and for me in particular, Alex Coughlin, and especially Gabe Kidd. Hikuleu you can put in there too, and apparently Kiyomiya, he's kind of got the similar Ospreay situation between him and New Japan and Pro Wrestling Noah, because Kiyomiya is back on the New Japan tour again. Is he coming to New Japan or what? What's going on over there? So there is a hopeful thing, because even though all of the crew that made New Japan hot over the last 5 years is now all in AEW, there is a new crop coming up. So that's a definite positive. But here's the thing I implore New Japan, if anybody's listening, Do not put any more titles on foreign talent who you do not have locked under contract, or who you suspect if AEW or WWE throws a bunch of money at them, they're going to F off and go up out the door with your championships. In fact, do we really need to put championships on the foreign talent? I mean, if these guys are just coming in like a Danielson, like a Claudio, like a Jon Moxley, if they're coming in to just do one-off matches, is it really necessary to put championships on these guys? So you don't run into another situation like you had with Brock Lesnar, like you had with Carl Anderson, like you had with Jonah, like you had with Aussie Open, like you have right now with Will Ospreay. As a New Japan fan, especially the Western New Japan fans, I'm telling you, this is the way we look at it. It makes, as I said before, it makes your titles and your championships and these big moments and these factions look Bush League. When the guys just say, all right, Vince or Tony's going to give me a lot of money, so whatever, I don't care about this championship. Man, you gave me that win in the G1. I don't care. I'm running a faction. Whatever, it's not important. Because it may not be an embarrassment to them in their eyes, but to us fans, and trust me, I've seen it all over social media, and this has been going on for years, it does make you look weaker compared to the other companies. You don't look like you're a partner to AEW. You look like you're a junior partner to AEW. And as I said, also on the positive side, this is a clean slate now for a lot of these guys, and not only the young guys, but guys like Zack Sabre Jr. and Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa and El Phantasmo, who are a little bit older foreign talent over there, but now they can kind of step into. And those guys, all of those guys have been loyal to that company for a long time. And maybe let's push them a little bit more. Maybe we should be pushing Zack Sabre Jr. a little bit more. Maybe we should be pushing Tama Tonga as long as he stays around a little bit more. So that's the positive, but there is one last little thing I was kind of wondering about. And again, it's about the lopsided nature of this AEW New Japan deal. Back in the day, back 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when New Japan's US partner was Ring of Honor, you got Ring of Honor guys pretty much almost once a month at a New Japan show, whether it was the War Raiders or War Machine, or if it was Adam Cole, or if it's Kyle O'Reilly, or if it was the Young Bucks, or if it was Hangman Page or Cody Rhodes. Cody Rhodes, I remember thinking at the time that he was signed to New Japan, and I keep having to remind myself, no, Cody was signed with Ring of Honor, but he did almost all the big shows of New Japan, so it felt like he was actually part of the New Japan roster. I was kind of expecting something like that with AEW, that there would be certain guys in AEW and maybe the mid-card guys that would be over there. And I don't work at AEW, so I don't know what it is behind the scenes. I don't know if Tony Khan goes and says, hey guys, anybody wants to do a New Japan show, let me know. Does New Japan come to Tony Khan and go, hey, we've got a tour coming up, can you send us a couple of guys? How does that work? Does the talent just not want to go over to Japan? That's definitely a possibility. But my thought as a fan, and this is again as a fan, is guys like Keith Lee, guys like the Dark Order, guys like Santana, Ortiz, Daniel Garcia, Cool Hand Ange, those guys who aren't really involved in some major storyline right now. Daniel Garcia, why don't you and Cool Hand Ange and blah, 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 why don't you go over there and go over to Japan for a week and, work a match, Zack Sabre Jr. versus Daniel Garcia. How about a Dark Order go over and we get John Silver against Hiromu Takahashi? That would be a crazy match. John Silver against Hiromu Takahashi. John Silver would get over gangbusters in Japan, probably more so than he would get over in the States, which would help him when he would come back to AEW. And again, I don't know. Maybe it's not offered. Maybe New Japan's not asking. Maybe Tony Khan's not offering it. Maybe some of the wrestlers don't want to go over to Japan. I don't know what it is. But I just say again, as a New Japan fan and an AEW fan, and maybe this is directed to some of the wrestlers I mentioned and some other people at that level in AEW who aren't really being used frequently on AEW TV, why not do a week in Japan? Why not go get the exposure over there? Send Hook. Hook and going over to New Japan for a tour would be probably help his career out and help his maturity as a wrestler immensely. Just don't put any titles on anybody you don't have on a contract anymore. That's all I ask for. And as far as Will Ospreay is concerned and everybody else that has signed and gone over from New Japan to AEW who are foreign talent, all I can really say is I'm happy for you guys. Get the money, take care of your family. I fully support Will Ospreay doing it. It was never an issue of me not wanting Ospreay to leave New Japan and go to AEW. Just the way that they did it and the way that things have it's been so lopsided as a partnership, more favoring AEW way more than it's favoring New Japan. It's kind of meh. I don't know. But we do have Wrestle Kingdom coming up. Bryan Danielson is going to be at Wrestle Kingdom against Okada. We are going to get Jon Moxley going over there. And so that's cool for now. But I think this partnership definitely has benefited AEW, and Tony Khan has more politely pulled a kind of a talent raid on New Japan. This is the most polite talent raid in the history of wrestling, what's going on with AEW in New Japan. But I want to know what you guys think about this. Were you disappointed with the fact that Will Ospreay announced that he was signing with AEW while he's still got 2.5 months left on his New Japan contract? Are you kind of upset now that the match for this new Intercontinental US, UK, whatever championship it's kind of an irrelevant match right now, because the winner, at best, the winner is going to be David Finlay, who who still hasn't really caught on. At worst, and this is New Japan, they might keep the title on Ospreay or put it on Mox. What do you think about the guys going over there? Are you happy for them? Are you upset? And what do you think New Japan really needs to do to get out of, having fallen from being the second biggest wrestling company in the world now to definitely a distant 3 now? What can they do to kind of reclaim some of the respect for their events, respect for their championships, and respect for their contracts and their storylines, that they don't get just shunted off to the side if WWE or AEW offers talent a lot of money? I will see you guys then. Have a good day.